Janet Stone, and after Janet Stone, it'll be Steve Kittleberger.
My name is Janet Stone, and I live in the town of Pulteney on the shore of the beautiful Cuca Lake. I am 75 years old and enjoy uncommonly good health. My goal in life is to live long enough to make the Guinness Book of World Records by being the oldest living woman. Hydrofracking on the Cuca Lake watershed may change that. I drink the water straight from the lake. It is unfiltered. I eat fish from the lake. They too drink unfiltered water. Perhaps they are designated to be the canaries in the coal mine. When dead fish start washing up on the lake shores, we will know that the water is no longer safe to drink. If the water in the lakes become contaminated, who will bear the cost of cleaning it up, if indeed it can be cleaned up? How many generations will have to live with a contaminated lake? Does anyone know? Can anyone tell me? Our lake empties into Seneca Lake. At the north end of Seneca Lake is a large wildlife preserve. Why do we work so hard to protect the wildlife if you're okay with permanently destroying it with hydrofracking? Is the small amount of gas that would be obtained from fracking the Finger Lakes watershed worth the potential damage it could do? As you see, I have used the words potential damage because no one knows what will happen or what damage it will be done. It may take several years for the poisons to make their way into the lake waters. By that time, the gas companies may be long gone and will deny culpability. You have exempted the Syracuse and New York City watersheds from fracking, plus a 4,000-foot buffer around the watershed. Obviously, you don't consider it safe. In my opinion, the buffer should be at least a mile or even more, and they should not be allowed to horizontal drill towards the watersheds. The Finger Lakes watershed should be given the same treatment as the Syracuse and New York City watersheds. Are we considered less important, expendable, collateral damage? Can you tell me?
Steve Kittleberger, and then it will be Anna Sears.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Kittleberger, a PhD chemist, a Xerox retiree, and an environmental chemist from Rochester. I'm going to address the issue of chemical safety in hydrofracking operations here in New York. No one wants toxic chemicals released into our streams or aquifers. No one wants wellhead workers exposed to carcinogenic materials. Yet, many of the chemicals which are on the lists published by the DEC in the SGEIS document that I am sure we have all studied are exactly such toxic and carcinogenic materials. To name just a few of my favorites, out of the several hundred in that listing, you will find benzene, toluene, xylene. One of my favorites is 1,4-dioxane. All of these chemicals are proposed for use in hydrofracking operations. All of these that I mentioned and more are potent carcinogens and toxins, depending, of course, on exposure. Wellhead workers do enjoy some protection when handling such toxic materials. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, of the U.S. Department of Labor requires that MSDS sheets be readily available in the workplace. For each chemical, a material safety data sheet must be prepared by the chemical manufacturer and must be made available by the employer in the workplace. But industrial chemicals are often prepared as solutions or mixtures of several compounds made up to a specific recipe for a specific hydrofracking operation. Think now of those three witches in Macbeth standing around the cauldron, dropping in eye of newt and toe of frog, wool of bat and tongue of dog. These recipes are often claimed as trade secrets by the manufacturers. Trade secrets enjoy an exemption from the normal MSDS regulations if the claim of trade secrecy can be supported. I'm here to tell you that as an industrial chemist with years of experience in these matters, this disclosure loophole is exactly the reason that trade secrecy claims are made. Let me close now with 3 simple recommendations for the DEC. First, trade secret formulations need to be banned in New York State hydrofracking operations. It simply masks and hides the content of these recipes. Either take a patent on the recipe or don't use it in the state of New York. The most toxic and carcinogenic chemicals need to be banned.
Sir, your time is up.
We will, and third, we should all work toward the green hydrofracking materials which are outlined in the SGEIS document. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna Sears, and then it will be Joseph Lavoie.
I'm Anna Sears, property owner in Monroe and Tompkins counties. First, I'd like to make it clear, when I say drilling or fracking, I'm referring to the whole life cycle of extracting natural gas through the high-volume slickwater horizontal hydraulic fracturing process. As a New York State concerned citizen and property owner, I am appalled that our state would consider sacrificing its most precious resource, water, to fracking for natural gas in hopes of paying off the state's debts in the short term and making a few individuals and companies very wealthy. I will address 3 issues surrounding water protection as they relate to fracking. Prohibiting fracking in New York State's and Syracuse's unfiltered watersheds is admitting that fracking is unsafe. Allowing drilling near other unfiltered water wells, lakes, and ponds is inequitable. The SGEIS's revised setbacks and buffers from aquifers and water wells remain inadequate and inconsistent. My recommendation, all setbacks and buffers must be set to provide maximum consistent protections. All watersheds should be given the same protections afforded New York City and Syracuse, or horizontally fracked wells should be prohibited in any watershed. 2, even though New York City's and Syracuse's public water is protected, they remain at risk. The prohibition on drilling in these primary aquifers is limited to only 2 years, at which time this prohibition will be reconsidered. Additionally, the SGEIS does not detail the conditions under which drilling permits would be considered or how the water infrastructure, the pipes, etc., would be protected. A recommendation, prohibit drilling near New York City's and Syracuse's aquifers permanently. And 3, from multiple reports and studies, we know that fracking brings with it innumerable environmental issues, specifically from surface toxic spills. Even with the proposed buffers and setbacks, toxic spills happen on the well pad as well as along roadways and will flow into local lakes, ponds, and streams. Who is there to oversee fracking so that spills don't occur in the first place? Recommendation, until the DEC has sufficient staffing to oversee fracking 24/7, fracking needs to be banned in New York. Both the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment, and the New York State Constitution state that all persons are deserving of equal protection under the law. I do not believe that the current version of the SGEIS protects all New Yorkers' access to clean water equally. So by permitting hydrofracking, the state would not be upholding the U.S. or New York State constitutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Joseph Lavoie, and then we're going to call our next group of speakers down after him.
My name is Joe. I'm from Rochester, New York. Where is our compassion? If we are booing people here striving for what they consider to be economic justice, or if we're booing people striving for what they consider ecological justice, how can we ever hear the answer to the question, hydrofracking in New York? I'm suggesting you'll find this answer written across America. Not online, not in logic, but written in the trail of tears, broken promises, nerve damage, and cancer. A trail that's marked by burned landowners across the country. A trail blazed by hydrofracking. I'm suggesting that everyone here takes a big step back so they can see the answer to the question, hydrofracking in New York, that is marked across the United States. It's a clear answer that reads, hell no.
All right, we're going to call our next group of speakers to come forward.
32 through 40, Judy Abrams, Roger Downs, Catherine Nadeau, Debbie Samarjan, Gary Hoffman, Jerry Menard, Tim Menard, Bonnie Freeman, and Charles Reddick.
And again, if you have spoken, if you could just move from the front rows to make room for the next group of speakers. And our next speaker is Rachel Morlock.
My name is Rachel Morlock, and I live in Rochester.
Rachel, can you speak into the microphone? Thank you.
I am deeply concerned about hydraulic fracturing, which poses significant risks to the health and well-being of our residents of New York. I am concerned about the many health issues that have not been given proper attention by the DEC draft. Specifically, there have been no public health risk assessments. There is no specified role for the Department of Health. There is unequal treatment for New York City and Syracuse water sources. The inability of filtration to screen out fracking toxins from water is very disconcerting. There is no required independent before and after water testing, and there are no guarantees that drilling can be safely done anywhere. I am also concerned as a resident of Rochester where the Utica Shale is in danger of fracking. This is especially problematic because of the lack of protection of our watershed in Rochester, unlike the New York City and Syracuse watersheds. Finally, I would like to voice my belief that any process which puts our environment or our neighbors in peril should be rejected. I hope for creative solutions to our energy needs and for jobs that empower rather than cripple our communities. Solutions that respect the resources we've been given, that honor the earth, and promote the health of our communities. Thank you.
Thanks. Susan Cuco.
My name is Susan Cookley. I live in Rochester. I'm concerned about the impact of tourism and vineyards and agriculture and the cultural arts from the hydrofracking. The Finger Lakes region of New York State is a place of beauty, peace, and limitless recreation, a source of spiritual nourishment for so many people, including plein-air painters like myself. The wine and fresh food industry from local farms is a source of economic and physical health for us all. Some customers have already told organic farmers that they will not buy from farms and drilling areas. Imagine the change in the beautiful landscape of New York when the gas drilling industry takes hold, placing multiple wells, upwards of 16 wells, on well pads, potentially as close as every square mile. The DEC cannot assure us that the fracking process will not contaminate the water supply crucial to the health and livelihoods of the people, wildlife, and crops that this land supports. I believe that the goods of the earth are gifts from God, intended for the benefit of all. We are entrusted with the responsibility of caring for these gifts and preserving them for future generations. I am concerned we will lose the beauty of our countryside, which is the legacy I want to pass on to my children and on my grandchildren. The industries that depend on that beauty and fresh water, tourism, the arts, vineyards, and aquaculture could suffer economic devastation, jeopardizing the long-term jobs and income these economies provide. We must protect these industries which are central to our state's economy. Fracking will bring short-term financial gain to our limited number of state residents at the cost of potential irretrievable destruction of our environment. Strict regulations must be set to protect our water, our countryside, and the unique rural beauty of our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Baker. name... I think we need help with our mic stand here. What?
My name is Ann Baker. I live in Rochester, New York. I'm concerned about the health problems that have arisen in people living and working close to fracking wells. And I'm concerned about the companies that refuse to admit any culpability. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Superfund Law were all enacted in the 1970s to protect the health of all citizens in our environment. But according to the Halliburton loophole passed in 2005, the oil and gas industry is exempt from the regulations of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Superfund Law. Water is being contaminated, people are getting sick, and the environment is becoming polluted in parts of the country that are hydrofracked. Why should gas companies be exempt from these laws?
Ken Zeserson.
Thank you. I'm Ken Zeserson, and I'm the Planning Board Chairman in Ulysses, New York. First, I'll address the discussion of socioeconomic impacts in the 2011 SGEIS. Let's remember the 2009 version was severely criticized for neglecting the community impacts of the hydrofracking invasion. The current version does indeed include a section purporting to consider community impacts, but it wasn't written by the DEC. It's the work of an outside consultant, Ecology and Environment Engineering, which proudly proclaims on its website that it has, quote, streamlined permitting processes on 50,000 miles of pipeline and more than 200 pipeline and gas storage projects, unquote. So the DEC paid a consultant expert in skirting regulations to write this section on community impacts. And these impacts were addressed in only 3 representative regions, the Broome-Chemung-Tioga County regions, Delaware-Otsego, and Chautauqua and Cattaraugus. But the area most sensitive to the hydrological insults of hydrofracking, an area laced with more lakes and streams than any other in New York, the Finger Lakes, has been omitted. The hydro in hydrofracking means water, and you omitted the Finger Lakes. Actually, the report does address the Finger Lakes obliquely, quote, some industries in the regional economies may contract as a result of the proposed development. Negative externalities associated with drilling could have a negative impact on some industries and like tourism and agriculture. Really? You mean choking rural roads with thousands of trucks, contaminating water, and polluting air might have a negative effect on our $3.7 billion wine and tourism industries and our burgeoning organic agriculture, and of course the thousands of existing jobs that currently work in those industries. This current SGEIS completely fails to address negative economic effects. And speaking of poisoned water, the SGEIS maintains hydrofracking is so dangerous it can't be allowed in the watersheds of Syracuse and New York because these watersheds are, quote, unique and deserve special protection. And yet hydrofracking is safe enough to do in the Finger Lakes? Starting right here in Dansville, thousands of citizens will be telling the DEC this current SGEIS has failed to protect us just as its predecessor did. And yet you've already issued proposed regulations governing hydrofracking even before the current SGEIS has endured public scrutiny. The verdict is in before the evidence has been presented. With due respect, this process is a mockery. And that's why my little town of Ulysses has banned hydrofracking, and dozens of other communities have joined us. You are sacrificing our environment and our local economies on an altar of greed, and we will fight you in the courts, we'll fight you in the legislatures, we'll confront you in the streets until you realize you cannot hydrofrack in the Finger Lakes.
Judy Abrams.
My name is Judy Abrams, and I live in Trumansburg on the shore of Cayuga Lake. This August, an invasion was noted in the Cayuga Lake Inlet that was so terrifying that a state of emergency was declared in the city of Ithaca. Within 8 weeks, the invasion was attacked at a cost of nearly $100,000 in municipal, county, and state funds. The name of the invader is Hydrilla verticillata. It is a waterweed that is known as the perfect aquatic weed for its ability to aggressively spread through waterways. Hydrilla can grow an inch a day and reach lengths up to 30 feet. It displaces native aquatic plants and ruins swimming, fishing, and boating. It clogs intake and outflow pipes. It harms tourism and ruins the value of waterfront property. In Florida, where hydrilla was allowed to become established so that eradication is impossible, the yearly cost to control the weed can reach $30 million. The thought of this weed spreading throughout the Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes is staggering. It has been estimated that hydrilla had been in the Cayuga Lake Inlet for 2 years. How did it go unnoticed in a body of water with so much use and in a city with so many trained biologists? It is because hydrilla looks exactly like every other waterweed to the untrained eye. Hydrilla is so invasive that a single inch of stem that reaches a body of water can root and establish a new population. Has hydrilla colonized other waterways in upstate New York? We don't know. The answer, as a survey, has not yet been undertaken. And the DEC, I was told, does not have a funding stream to allow for such a survey. The water supplies for hydrofrac in the Marcellus Shale can come from any public body of water, including lakes, streams, ponds, and marshes. In infested areas, hydrilla can grow in all these types of waterways. Water is suctioned into thousands of trucks each time that a well is fracked. The trucks travel throughout the region and move from one body of water to another. This is the perfect way to spread a weed as invasive as hydrilla. There are provisions in the SGEIS to stop the spread of invasive species. However, these provisions were written before hydrilla was discovered in the Marcellus Shale area. Section 7422 suggests that trucks will be inspected and cleaned after drawing water from a certain area before they're transporting the water to another area. But inspections will have to be incredibly thorough to make sure that not even an inch of hydrilla will slip through, attached to equipment or the surface of a truck. If hydrofracking is allowed in upstate New York, we will be counting on the gas companies themselves to identify a weed that looks almost identical to other weeds and to clean every single truck so that not even a single inch of hydrilla will be transported to new bodies of water. If hydrilla does spread to new areas of our state, there will be no way to prove whether gas companies had anything to do with the infestations, and New York will be left to control this weed, which will cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thank you. Roger Downs.
My name is Roger Downs. I'm the Conservation Program Manager with the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter. With my 3 minutes, I would like to object to the premature nature of holding these hearings for draft regulations, perhaps the only hearings we will get, when it is clear that the DEC has not achieved a foundational understanding of what needs to be regulated. And by this, I mean to say that the hearings should only be for the SGEIS. We should not be commingling the seeker and SAPA processes. How can anyone gauge the strength of the new rules when the DEC has failed to provide comprehensive cumulative impact analysis, public health risk assessments, or meaningful wastewater management plans, or even a completed SGEIS? We ask that you suspend this rulemaking process until the seeker process has concluded. With that said, and perhaps my only opportunity to speak publicly about the regs, I want to talk about a gaping regulatory loophole that needs to be closed. The new proposed regulations only pertain to gas wells that consume 300,000 gallons of water or more during the hydrofracking process. Gas wells that consume less than this threshold will only be subject to the permitting conditions established by the 1992 GEIS and regulations that were last updated in 1972. It should be noted that in 1992, the GEIS was to be the foundation for new regulations, and it was specified throughout that document. And almost 20 years later, we still do not have these foundational regulations on the books. What the DEC is proposing is a two-track system of regulations where there is a chasm between protections. The SGEIS socioeconomic study estimates that 10%, or about 5,000 wells in the Marcellus, will be vertical wells, some of them utilizing less than 300,000 gallons of water. I suspect many, suggesting that thousands of wells in the coming years will be allowed to use open waste pits, avoid chemical disclosure, and be free of new emission standards, setback requirements, and other improved mitigations mandated for high-volume horizontal hydraulic fracturing. Again, the DEC was supposed to protect New York with oil and gas regulations 20 years ago, and they failed to do so. It is entirely inappropriate now for the DEC to move forward with supplemental regulations for non-existent foundational regulations. The DEC needs to create one unified regulatory standard for all oil and gas development. The current draft regulations create a double standard that will inevitably lead to abuse and unanticipated environmental degradation. The Atlantic chapter seriously doubts any amount of regulation can adequately protect New York from this inherently flawed industrial practice, but at the very least, we ask that you follow a process that does not subvert public participation or the spirit of seeker. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Nadeau. Sir, could I have a copy of your remarks?